Good day, class. My name is Dr. Florence Knapp, your lecturer for Nurs 345, Nursing Research. Today is the first session, and then we're going to talk about ways of knowing. Ways of knowing are important because you are all here to acquire knowledge in nursing. So, I just mentioned that ways of knowing are important. There are so many ways that we can acquire knowledge. And so today, being the first session, we will discuss what knowledge is. We will also talk about the different ways of knowing, and then explain some problem-solving strategies. So today, as I said, we will define knowledge, the areas, ways of knowing, problem-solving skills and strategies, and then we will finally talk about the scientific method of problem solving. So, for your reading materials, I want you to look at the fundamental patterns of knowing in nursing by Kappa. And then the URL is there for you to get this article. So, let's get going. What is knowledge? What is knowledge? We are trying to define what knowledge is. As you can see from this picture, there's a key on the word knowledge, which means that knowledge is a key, or the key that you can use to open so many doors. We're trying to see how we can use this key in nursing. So knowledge is the acquisition of any of the following: skills, experiences, education, theoretical understanding, and then your practical understanding as well. Areas of knowledge. Having defined knowledge, what are the areas of knowledge? So, as you can see from this picture, we have about 3 circles interlocked. The very first circle you see on the picture represents the areas of knowledge, within which we also have the ways of knowledge. So there are so many areas of knowledge, and nursing is an area of knowledge. And so you are all here because you want to acquire knowledge in an area called nursing. So there are so many ways that you can acquire knowledge. You can acquire knowledge through perception, language, reasoning, emotions, culture, and then science. We would briefly talk about each of these. So let's look at how we acquire knowledge through perception. If you look at this picture, I want all of you to try to see how many ways you can interpret this picture. I have several ways I can interpret this picture, and that tells you my perception about the picture. And that means that perception is a way that you can acquire knowledge, but the problem with perception is that it is a primary way of knowing. Primary way of knowing means that it is very subjective. That means that it's not objective, and then in science it may be difficult to authentically keep that knowledge as a way of knowing. Now let's move to the next one, which is language. We all have different languages, and some of us think in our languages and then we translate that into English. The way you think in your language can also be translated into the behavior that you put up. So language is a way of knowing, but as I said earlier, it is also subjective. And so for that matter, in science, it may be a little difficult to keep language as a way of knowing. Another way of knowing is reasoning. We all reason to be able to make some decisions, but once again, it is a subjective way of knowing. Then emotions. We all have emotions. The way you think can bring out either positive or negative emotions. It is also a way of knowing, but because it is subjective, it's difficult to keep that knowledge as an authentic way of knowing. Culture. We all come from, or we all have cultures. Cultures are usually associated with some beliefs, norms, and values. We all have cultural backgrounds. It is also a way of knowing. The way we talk, the way we think is governed by our beliefs. And so we can acquire knowledge through that, but again, it's subjective, and so we cannot keep that as scientific knowledge. So another way of knowing is through science. Science is a way of knowing, and it is also known as the empirical way of knowing, which is why we are all in this classroom, because we want to acquire knowledge that can help us, be able to put knowledge together in the scientific way, which means that we want objective knowledge. Good, so now let's look at problem solving, the usual or the normal way of solving everyday problems. And then as we go along, we'll be able to compare that with the scientific way of solving problems. Now let's talk about the problem solving process. And we are talking about the way we solve the everyday problems that we encounter in our lives. First of all, before you talk about strategies that you can use to solve the problem, you have to be able to identify the problem. The next step is to develop alternative ways or different ways that you can solve the problem. Then among these different ways, there must be one that you would want to try. So you select the best option and then implement, which is step 4. When you have implemented, if you are lucky and the strategy works, then you are done. You don't have anything to do because you have solved the problem. If it's not solved, it means that you have to go through the cycle again. Probably you didn't identify the problem well. So you identify the problem and go through all the steps again until you get the problem solved. So in everyday life, that is how we solve problems. So now let's look at the scientific method of problem solving. Scientific method of problem solving. What is the scientific method of solving problems? How different is that from the everyday way of solving problems? We will discuss that. Now, being scientific means that you are systematic in the way you solve the problem, you are skeptical, and then you are ethical. Why are these 3 terms important? Systematic because you are giving it a serious thought at every level that you go through. And that is exactly what we do in research, which is the scientific way of knowing. You are also skeptical because you are giving room for people to critique your work or for people to give you some criticisms. You are ethical because there are ethical ways of doing research, or there's a code of conduct of every research. We want to be sure that the people who participate in research are not harmed, and so you have to go through the ethical way of gathering your data. We went through the process of solving problems for the everyday problems. So now let's go through the steps of solving scientific problems or scientific way of knowing. Again, you start by asking a question. Research is, based on curiosity. It's based on a passion you have about something you can't find an answer to. So that question you have is the one that starts the process of scientific way of solving the problem. Then you do a background research. A background research here means that you have to read about the problem or the question that you have in mind. After you have read about it, probably you have come up to know that other people have also tried solving the same problem, but maybe not the way that you want to solve it. And so you construct what we call a hypothesis, which will be explained in the upcoming sessions. After that, once you have a hypothesis means that it is a tentative statement that you have made about the question that you have, but you don't know whether that statement may be true or not. And so you need to gather some data, analyze that data, and then be able to write a report which will be able to tell you whether what you have, the hypothesis you have made, can be supported or not. So these are the steps for the scientific way of solving problems. So in summary, today we have talked about ways of knowing, areas of knowing, and then we have also tried to define the scientific method of solving problems and try to compare that with the everyday way of solving problems. So in our next session, we will define nursing research and then research itself and discuss the ethical issues to be considered in nursing research. So these are some books that you can contact for further reading. They are all on the Sakai website, where you can access each of them. So thank you, and then I'll see you in the next session.